Hi, this is Bo Wilder. Okay, so I ruffled a few feathers with my last essay. Apparently, saying that making a Star Wars film with AI is hard wasn't a particularly popular opinion. Which is fair, come on. Life is hard. Roofing in July is hard. Raising kids is hard. Making a Star Wars film with AI is obviously not that kind of hard. You know, it's just very different kind of hard in its own little weird way, I guess. Okay, so this time around, I promise I will not offend anyone. All right? All right. The sequel. I've been making films since I was a kid, and I guess it was almost inevitable that filmmaking eventually became my career, which is pretty incredible in itself. I mean, I get paid to tell stories. Just mostly other people's stories, client work, and I genuinely love doing it. But at the end of the day, they're someone else's stories and someone else's dreams. Every year I tell myself, this summer I'm finally making that Western. Then it become, what? Okay, so look, next summer we're going full in. Look, you can't rush art, okay? You just can't. And somehow those stories just kept patiently waiting on the sidelines. And so I got curious about this whole AI thing, and I wondered if I can make my own little Star Wars film using these tools.
Devastator Actual! This is Colonel Hador!
Nailed it. First try. And honestly, I didn't think too much of it. I just wanted to tell a story. And then...
There's something wrong with YouTube, right?
Suddenly, I needed representation. Security, a trailer. I needed to hire a guy whose only job was saying,
Bo isn't taking meetings today. He's busy making his own Star Wars, all right? Ta-ta! Bloody hell, mate. That was Lucasfilm. We just turned out Lucasfilm. That's proper mental, innit?
Okay, so I'm exaggerating a bit just to illustrate a point, but you know, people seem to really enjoy the film and kind of care about the story, not just the technical aspect of this stuff. And that was incredibly encouraging. And now I had to make a sequel. And so my mind immediately went to George Lucas, you know, after he'd finished making Star Wars and started working on The Empire Strikes Back. Oh, relax. I'm not comparing myself to George Lucas. I'm not a complete asshat. I am Temu Lucas at best. But I was thinking about the problem he had to solve. How do you follow up something that people unexpectedly connected with? So what I've always loved about The Empire is that it didn't necessarily become bigger, it became deeper. So A New Hope is a wonderful adventure. It's fast, optimistic, and full of heroes and princesses, space wizards, and all that good stuff. But Empire slows things down. It becomes more personal, and suddenly it's about failure, sacrifice, uncertainty, family or dysfunctional family, people making impossible choices, right? Relax, I'm not comparing my film to The Empire Strikes Back. My film is the We Have Empire at Home version of The Empire Strikes Back, so let's keep calm. I will offend no one. Yeah, that's my mission, and I'm sticking to it. So instead of trying to make part 2 bigger, I guess I tried to make it a little deeper. We talked about limitations in my last essay, so I kept leaning into that idea. The power outage from part 1 wasn't just a cliffhanger anymore, it became the foundation for part 2. So both sides were suddenly operating at a disadvantage, and nobody really knew what was going on anymore. So the rebels were vulnerable, and the Empire was vulnerable. And I hope that would create a much more interesting drama than simply making everything bigger. Oh, I'm such a pretentious So I always end up caring about the characters I write, whether they're the good guys or the bad guys. I just want to get to know them through the writing and through the scene. And someone left a comment saying, I like Hador. Hador is a good man. And I thought that was funny because I agree. He's a good man, but on the wrong side, if you will. One thing that I really admired about the TV series Andor was how it explored ordinary life inside the Empire. Not just officers shouting at each other, but just people. I love that. So while showing ordinary people on both sides of the conflict, I was also chasing something completely different. The original trilogy magic. You know, that warm, fuzzy 1980s adventure feeling that the original trilogy has. That's surprisingly difficult to recreate. I mean, many have tried, but I believe that this is mainly due to the fact that audiences have changed. So today we expect more nuance. We expect characters to have understandable motivations. We expect heroes to fail and villains to occasionally make sense. So I guess my goal became trying to find that weird middle ground between that adventurous spirit of the original trilogy and the more mundane perspective that something like Andor explores. And I truly mean that as a compliment. Andor is fascinated by ordinary people, like office politics, bureaucracy, everyday life inside the Empire, and that's exactly why it works. Oh, relax. I'm not saying Andor isn't fun. Actually, that is exactly what I'm saying, but I'm definitely not criticizing Andor. I would been doing catering on that production, you know. But relax. I'm not criticizing catering. I'm great profession. You make people happy. I would have been fired from catering. No, I'm not criticizing being fired from a job. Plenty of wonderful people have been. AI Slop. AI filmmaking is nowhere near being accepted as a filmmaking tool right now. I don't know if that'll change anytime soon, but I'm actually optimistic. I think one of the biggest reasons AI has become so divisive is the incredible amount of slop. Depending on how you define it, maybe 90% of what's being generated right now could probably be considered slop. But then again, what is slop? To me, slop is laziness. It's quantity over quality. It's treating creativity like a slot machine. Generate, upload, repeat. I've read estimates suggesting that somewhere between 30 and 40% of all new music uploaded to Spotify today is AI generated. Now, I'm sure there are some genuinely interesting work hidden in there, people experimenting, artists building hybrid workflows, but I'd also be willing to bet there are quite a few button smashers in there, people treating the platform like a slot machine. So maybe this is just a part of every new technology. But I think people get tired surprisingly fast of dancing ducks, fake movie trailers, and celebrities selling suspicious supplements that they never actually endorsed. I get it. That's AI slop. I agree. I get the occasional AI slop comment under my films too. Honestly, I don't even take it personally. People are fed up, and I completely understand where that reaction comes from. But here's the thing. I don't think slop is defined by the tool. I think it's defined by the intention behind it. AI will absolutely be used for bad things. That's inevitable. I mean, just like Photoshop, just like the internet, and just like social media, every powerful tool gets abused. But it also opens entirely new ways of telling stories, and that is what excites me. Somebody left a comment saying, "Don't you think Spielberg would have used these tools if they existed back then?" I don't know, maybe. I honestly think that it would have at least explored them. That is what all artists do. They explore new tools of telling stories. I've always believed that if your story is good, it honestly doesn't matter if you tell it with stick figures. I mean, if it hits, it hits. So maybe the better question isn't, is AI filmmaking real filmmaking? Maybe the better question is, what separates slop from filmmaking? Directing AI. It isn't really prompting, it's directing. And occasionally an obstacle course in managing my self-temper. So long before I ever open Kling or Grok, I have a scene in my head. I have a picture in my head. So maybe it's, the characters, where they are. Sometimes it's just a feeling or, a tonality of the thing. That part honestly isn't very different from traditional filmmaking. I'm still asking myself the same questions. Where's the camera? Who is looking at who? And what story does the composition tell? And what should the audience feel here? So AI doesn't answer those questions for me. It never has. Once I know what I'm chasing, I usually start with a still image, because tone comes before motion, almost every time. So most of the times I'm trying to recreate that slightly imperfect 1980s feel. Old Panavision lenses, 35mm film, a bit of softness, imperfections, Feels like it came from a movie you rented on VHS when you were 12. I often feed Nano Banana Pro reference images I've already made. That could be character turnarounds, locations, costumes. Sometimes I'll even exaggerate the motion blur in an image, not because I want the final frame to be blurry, but because I've learned that video models understand speed if the first image already suggests motion. It's a little trick. Then comes my favorite part, directing actors. Yes, AI actors. So it could be like you prompt stuff like hold your hand on the headset while talking because they can't quite hear what's being said on the other end. Or someone who's nervous might scratch their face while talking or rub their temple or hesitate before answering. Those tiny little moments often tell us more than the dialogue itself. Of course, AI filmmaking is basically one giant exercise in dealing with limitations.
Well, how about now, damn it? Nothing. Hey, listen, I reckon we ought to cool it for a bit. Any ideas?
If you get exactly what you wanted on your first try, well, go and buy a lottery ticket, because that's about how likely it is.
The
whole job becomes figuring out how close can I get to the picture in my head.
I'll check the couplings. Make it quick.
Okay, so no, not that.
That explains a lot.
The Forsey? Well, I reckon I do. I sure hope so.
I repeat, this is Colonel Hoth. We are in position outside Echo Base. Requesting instructions. Do we proceed?
And maybe more importantly, where do I draw the line between perfect and just close enough?
What is that?
It's moving! Stay back!
Stay back! No!
Devastack your auctions. It's going round bad, you cock bake.
Two old farts and a busted snow speeder against the Galactic Empire.
Well, it doesn't have to be pretty, right? As long as it works. Weep. Ooh-wee! Bud, where's Kyla? Beep, whoop. Does anyone speak droid?
Come on now. Breathe. Breathe.
I reckon we ought to cool it for a bit. Any ideas?
Roger that, Captain. We're rolling out, heading for the door. Okay, Pops, it's go time. Maximum firepower! Huh?
I wish I could tell you I made these up.
Whose helmet is this? Huh? Whose helmet is this? I want to know which one of you is wearing it.
Nope. Nope. Now, what is this? Take this off. Take it off. So, turning this into a coherent film is mostly about patience. And occasionally questioning your life choices as a grown man arguing with imaginary actors. So here's the thing. In traditional filmmaking, you generally don't want to tell an actor how to deliver a line. They've done their homework. They've thought about the character. They have ideas of their own now. Your job is to guide that performance and capture it in the most interesting way possible. And sometimes good directing is simply knowing when to stay out of their way. So AI is a little bit different. It's incredibly literal, so you have to explain everything, like what genre you're working in, exactly what the scene is trying to say, the emotional tone, the pacing, sometimes even which word to emphasize. So you can't really assume anything. And remember, always end your prompt with no music. There, I just saved you a lot of headache. So yes, in many ways you end up being much more specific than you would ever be with a real actor. But here's the interesting part. Just like on a real film set, you also have to stay open to surprises. Sometimes the image model suggests a set piece that you would have never thought of yourself, or sometimes a performance comes back slightly different than what you imagined, and somehow it's better now. These are what's called happy accidents. One example from part 2 is the echo bass mechanics, Brenner and Pops. Originally, they were never meant to become major characters. They were simply supposed to get the snowspeeder working and get it in the air. But somewhere during production, I just started liking them. So I kept writing for them. And suddenly they were talking about fear, about faith, about what the Force actually means if you're just an ordinary person caught in the middle of war. I read one comment saying, "Now there's a wholesome message I can get behind. Pray with your kids." And I don't know, I thought that was beautiful. And none of that was planned, it just happened very organically because I started seeing what these characters could become. And now I want to get to know them too. Sometimes the film just quietly tells you what it wants to become. And your job as a director is simply to notice and keep an open mind. Sometimes you spend hours fighting a single scene with rewrites, changing dialogue, tweaking tiny pauses, tweaking performances, music, timing, and then suddenly it comes alive. The scene plays back to you as if it had always existed. And that's an incredibly beautiful feeling. And in that moment, there is really no difference between making a traditional film and making one with AI. The intention is exactly the same: to tell a story, to convey something real, to make someone feel. Getting there just happens to involve a very strange workflow. Traditional filmmaking is full of limitations too, and we talked about this in the last essay, but AI filmmaking sort of feels like every time you shout action, a bunch of monkeys shows up and starts throwing stuff at the camera. Like you can't anticipate some of the weird stuff. So you fix one problem and immediately discovers 3 new ones. So quite often you don't tell the AI what should happen. You show what's already happened. So many of the times you have to imply the action in the very first frame and give the model enough visual momentum that it simply continues what you already started. And for me, every single shot starts with a still image. And for that, I use Nano Banana Pro. So it's really good with stuff like fire, smoke, sparks, debris. Then Kling sees what's already happening and simply continues the action for a much more high-end element. So if I would prompt something natively in Kling, like the ship explodes, Well, you usually end up with something like this. Rather than if I imply the action from Nano Banana Pro, you get this. Some things AI simply refuses to do. I had one shot where a snowspeeder had to fly sideways through a narrow opening, so the craft would flip on its side with the cockpit facing the camera. Sounds simple enough, right? Kling absolutely hated that idea. No. Okay, no, not. No. Okay. Oh, come on, now you're just messing with me. The invisible work. Sometimes you just have to rely on traditional ways of doing things, like compositing. There was this one shot that just wouldn't work. A snowspeeder flying sideways through the gate. Now, these are all perfectly sincere attempts to get one snowspeeder through one doorway. So I eventually came to the conclusion that this just wasn't going to work. So I went old school. Instead of asking the AI to solve the entire shot, I broke it into separate pieces, separate plates. So one plate was just the background with the gate and the snowtroopers coming in. Another plate was just the snowspeeder against the blue screen. And then I would stitch everything together inside Adobe After Effects. Now, it's not the greatest shot in the film, but it gets the job done. One of the most common criticisms of AI filmmaking is that people assume the computer did all the work. And I understand why, because all they ever get to see is the finished shot. They never get to see this. Photoshopping, masking, removing, making clean plates, moving stuff around. Now I need new shadows, more shadows, swapping heads, making them blue, adding tiny scribbly scan lines. Hey honey, not now, I'm working. I could probably get paid in AI credits at this point. Did I pay my rent this month? What if I bought a house and rented half of it out? I could probably be living for free, fixing scale issues. They're gonna call me out on the scale issues. Wait, what is the correct scale of a TIE fighter next to a Star Destroyer? Let's give it a goog. Huh. A Star Destroyer is 1.6 kilometers long, and that somehow didn't answer my question. After Effects, tracking, compositing, more tracking, making tiny TIE fighters with tiny parallax. Maybe they'll call me a genius. And the award for Outstanding Tiny Parallax goes to Bo Wilder. Wow. I'd become unbearable. I'd have to go to India and sort myself out. Fixing sliding doors. For the love of God, stop closing the doors. Painting out drunk officers. Hey, wrong way, Steve. Fixing rank insignias. Because apparently that's something I do now. Painting laser bolts. Animating laser bolts. Animating more laser bolts. Fixing whatever this is. Removing mysterious droid. adding back the missing handle. Because this is just my life as a VFX artist now. One of the coolest discoveries I made making this film was that some of the best solutions turned out to be the oldest ones. We've talked about how every extra character, every extra action, and every extra moving part lowers your chance of getting a usable shot. I leaned on the old ways once again. Blue screen. I had two problems to solve. The first one was surprisingly simple. No matter what I did, Kling insisted on moving the background outside the windows. So even in the quiet scene where the snowspeeder was parked and Brenner and Pops were just having a heart-to-heart. So I took my favorite take, I ran it through Kling Omni, and prompted it to replace everything outside the windows with a solid blue screen. So now I could isolate the windows, composite the background separately, stabilize the interior, and suddenly everything behaved exactly the way I wanted. The second problem was trickier, flying shots from Pop's seat. You know, the pilot and the gunner sit back to back, which means their backgrounds should move in opposite directions, but Kling never quite understood that. So once again, blue screen. Separate elements and composite everything in post. It suddenly dawned on me. 45 years later, I was using the exact same technique as ILM to make a snowspeeder fly over the snow of Hoth once more. Different tools, same problem, same solution. Now, what is this? Take this off. Take it off. Less about AI. People often ask me about the tools. What am I using? Kling, Seedance, Grok, Nano Banana Pro, Topaz. I get it. They're fascinating. And I too love this technology so much. Not because it makes filmmaking easy, but because it lets me dream bigger. It lets me tell stories that I simply could not have told just a few years ago. I genuinely hope these tools end up in the hands of people with stories to tell, people who may never got a chance before, people with ideas that would have been impossible to make. And I also hope they find their place in traditional filmmaking, not replacing artists, but working alongside practical effects, CGI, and everything else we already use. My happy place has always been storytelling. That's where I disappear for a while. My family calls it the Anaconda, after that hilarious Jack Black movie and the scene where he dives into the screenwriting process, and we see these reflections dancing across the walls as he becomes completely immersed in the world of his own creation. Oh man, I could relate to that so much. So if done right, I want to know what happens next. I want to laugh, I want to be surprised. And if I can make someone else feel that too, then that's the whole point. One of my favorite things after releasing part 2 was reading the comments. People weren't necessarily asking what prompt I used. They were talking about Hador, Brenner, Kyla, about what happens next. Honestly, that makes me happier than any compliment about my, technical skills ever could. Because when people leave talking about the characters instead of the tools, I feel like I have done something right, at least as a filmmaker. Oh, and before I forget, over the past months, I've been thinking about making something a little different, something a bit more educational. Maybe a series, maybe even a course someday. I'm not promising anything, but I'm just thinking out loud. But if that's something you'd genuinely be interested in, what would you actually want to learn? Not just what prompt did you use here, but what part of the process would you like me to dive a little deeper into? Directing AI, building shots, storytelling, editing, compositing, or maybe something completely different, I don't know. Please let me know in the comments because I'm genuinely curious. Anyway, I set out to make a plain behind-the-scenes video, and somehow, again, it turned into a whole essay. I really need to learn how to YouTube. So thank you to the 3 people still watching at this point. You know who you are, and you guys rock. Seriously. You make me want to keep pursuing this, and hopefully you might feel inspired too. All right. May the Force be with you always.